Most people live as if they have forever. They put off the conversation. They delay the trip. They say, someday, like someday is a place they'll eventually arrive at. They won't, and neither will you. But here's what's strange. Knowing that changes everything. 2,000 years ago, a Roman emperor sat alone each morning and wrote, not orders, not strategies, reminders to himself that he was mortal. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and what he understood about death, most people today are still too afraid to learn. This channel exists for the ones who aren't afraid. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine someone handed you a jar with 28,000 marbles in it, one marble for every day of an average human life. Now imagine you've already spent 10,000 of them, roughly your first 27 years, just becoming a person, learning to walk, going to school, figuring out who you are. You open the jar and you realize it's already less than 2/3 full. Most people never look at the jar. They operate under what psychologists call the optimism bias, the deep, unconscious belief that bad things happen to other people, that they will be the exception, that there will always be more time. Seneca saw this 2,000 years before modern psychology had a name for it. He wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a great deal of it." The problem isn't death. The problem is the illusion that we're not moving toward it, right now, with every breath. The Stoic had a practice for this. They called it memento mori, Latin for remember that you will die. This wasn't morbid. It wasn't pessimistic. It was the most practical tool they had. Roman generals, returning from victory parades, would have a slave ride beside them in the chariot, not to celebrate, but to whisper in their ear, memento mori. Remember, you are mortal. At the height of glory, at the peak of power. The reminder, this is temporary. Why? Because the man who forgets he is mortal makes different decisions than the man who remembers. The man who forgets wastes. Tuesday. He postpones the apology. He skips the morning. He lives like a rough draft, always assuming there will be a final version later. The man who remembers. He looks at Tuesday differently. Tuesday becomes precious, not because it's special, because it might be one of the last ones. There's a palliative care nurse named Bronnie Ware, who spent years working with people in the last weeks of their lives. She started writing down their regrets. The number one regret, recorded over and over, was this: I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. Not, I wish I'd worked more. Not, I wish I'd worried more. Not, I wish I'd spent more time being afraid of what people thought. Almost nobody at the end regrets being too bold. Almost everybody regrets being too careful. Marcus Aurelius understood this. He wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but he should fear never beginning to live." Read that again. Not death, not failure, not pain, never beginning to live. That is what deserves your fear. So, what do you actually do with this? The Stoics weren't philosophers who sat in towers writing theory. They were generals, emperors, slaves. They lived in the real world, and their philosophy was built for it. Here is what Marcus Aurelius actually did every morning. He would ask himself 3 questions. First, what could go wrong today? Not to be anxious, but to be prepared, to strip away the illusion that today is guaranteed. Second, what would the best version of me do today? Not the most successful, not the most impressive, the most aligned, the most true. Third, if this were my last morning, would I be living this day the way I'm about to live it? 3 questions, 5 minutes, and suddenly the day has weight. You're not drifting through it, you're choosing it. That's what memento mori does. It doesn't make you sad, it makes you deliberate. It turns passive time into active life. Here's the truth that the Stoics kept coming back to. You cannot control how long you live. You cannot stop the sand from falling. But you can decide right now, today, whether the time that remains is spent drifting or chosen. Seneca said it best. Omnia aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Everything is alien to us. Only time is truly ours. So the question isn't whether you're going to die. You are. The question is whether you're going to start living before you do. If this made you think, subscribe.